Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Kelley. I am the chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party. Today, I am joined by Joey Mendoza Atkins. He is running for U.S. Senate. He's also a candidate, a sports agent, attorney, and member of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party. And he's here to talk to us about some important issues about male engagement in the party. Before we get started, I just want to give a brief disclaimer because we don't want to get in trouble. When we have candidates or potential candidates on this podcast, that's not indicative of support or endorsement of their campaign. We support all of our Democratic candidates equally and giving equal playing field. So just want to give that just a heads up before we get started. Joey, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate you being here.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, tell me, what do you think is the primary issue that we're seeing with men, particularly young men, and the Democratic Party?
Sure, right. And this is such an interesting topic. It's truly fascinating academically, I guess from an academic standpoint. But I think in this most recent election cycle, we saw the actual impact, the actual manifestations of some of these issues. And unfortunately, I don't, it's not trying to, it's complicated, right?
It always is.
It's complicated, you know, but I think that's an important place to start, you know. So for me, just like with any problem, I mean, we're attorneys, right? So you got to first really identify the issue, which I think we've done, which is, you know, why did the Democratic Party or why has the Democratic Party been bleeding support from young men? Okay, so we identify that, cool. Now we got to understand the issues, right? And I think this is where the party, you know, people generally have really missed the boat here, right? Because it's not so simple. I think, you know, we spend our time on social media or kind of out in the world, on campaigns, at town halls. You know, one reason, a primary reason, so why are we losing men? Why are we losing young men? It might be, well, misogyny, well, patriarchy, right? And I'm not saying those aren't a thing. They are. Right. But I also think the issue is a lot more complex than that. So as a starting point, what are the issues? And I think for me, I don't even start at a gender related issue, right, as being kind of or like a problem or dynamic. And I think the Democratic Party has a lot of responsibility here. For me, it starts with, okay, recognizing that, well, men are choosing maybe the Republican Party over the Democratic Party to do what? Which is to resolve their issues. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the issues I think are actual and perceived. Okay. Right? You know, and unfortunately, perceived issues are real issues to that person. You know, and I use a lot of dating examples, you know, to sort of make the point, like analogies. So for example, if you have a, if you keep dating, you know, a toxic partner, right? You just keep dating the same type of person over and over again, right? There's an actual issue, which is you keep getting your heart broken, right? But there's also the perceived issues, which a lot of people have, which is like, what's wrong with men? What's wrong with women, right? When the issue might also be within themselves, right? Okay.
Right, so we always say, for example, that if you keep doing the same thing over again, keep getting the same results, rather than looking outside, you should probably look inside, right?
Correct, exactly, yeah. Exactly. And I think everybody shares this in terms of what's going on with young men, because while there is certainly, so in a second, I'm going to kind of identify what I think are maybe the actual issues that are leading to for men to feel like, hey, I have a problem that needs to be addressed. I'm going with this group versus this group, right? And then there are, of course, the perceived ones, which are, I think, you know, there's a problem with women, there's a problem with maybe the Democratic Party, whatever it might be. As a starting point, I think the main issue sort of underlining a lot of this pain is structural in nature, has nothing to do with gender in many ways, right? We're all in the same boat. And this is something that the Democratic Party used to be the party I think people look to resolve these issues such as wage stagnation, right? When you think about it, right? These are affecting everybody. Everybody's getting, I can't curse on this, right?
No.
Okay. Everybody's getting, everybody, unless you're rich in the system, in this society, unless you're rich, everybody thinks they're getting played, right? Because they are.
Right.
And so, well, how does that manifest as some sort of like gender issue or some sort of men feel like they're getting shafted in this society? Well, if you understand that as a person, man, woman, whoever, but let's just stay on men, that, I work a lot. I spend a lot of time working. It's not fun. I get yelled at. I get told what I can do, when I can do it. And on top of that, I can't afford to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
I can't afford to buy a car. I'm 39 years old. I've never owned a house before, and I'm a lawyer, right? And that isn't to say it's therefore somebody else's fault. That we got to look within ourselves to know what to be honest with ourselves, right? But it's also true.
Well, if I may,
Sure.
I mean, because if we were talking about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, someone your age with your academic skill set and your occupation, it would be absurd that you couldn't own a home.
Totally absurd.
So there's a lack of economic opportunity nowadays that we did not experience in the past.
Exactly. And like I said, I'm a fortunate one. I'm a lucky one in this sort of world, right? Compared to most. And I even have this sort of issue. Like I've only, to be honest, I feel like started to become maybe more financially stable like very recently. And like I said, I'm one of the lucky ones. And so, again, if you have to understand the underlying issues and then sort of see how it sort of tracks and affects the different demographics within our society differently, because men do get affected by this sort of this issue a bit differently than maybe a woman would, maybe whatever. So that's a starting point, right? Because that is frustrating, right? You work hard and you can't afford anything, and most of us are in the same boat unless you're rich. Now, kind of, okay, well, how does that affect a man? Well, remember the response, men, our value a lot of time is kind of predicated on, leading a household, right? Being able to make a living and provide for a family. Like that is still an expectation in society, and I think a fair one. I think that we should embrace that role if that's, the type of relationship we want to be in. But if you're feeling that, that's my value as a man in many ways, and the expectations of me is to be a provider, to be able to be a leader, and I work, and I can barely afford to survive. Yeah, you'll start to see how men might feel a bit shafted in the society. Again, there's actual problems and there's perceived ones. Ultimately, some of these issues with that are structural in nature, it creates this feeling of loss, this feeling of I'm getting sort of the short end of the stick here. And the biggest problem that we're facing as Democrats, right, is that Republicans, both as a party and culturally, have been able to capitalize and say, hey, you know what the problem is? It's not you. It's women. It's immigrants, right? Right. And
blaming the other.
They're finding an enemy. They're finding an adversary to blame their problems on. Again, there are actual problems. We all know what it's like to work and not feel like we have anything to show for it. Like, God, we can't even go on vacation, right? Can't take breaks, right? And so that affects everybody. But men have a different sort of role in society, which I don't think is a bad thing. But the only people who are out there for the last several years telling men what the problem is, they're doing one of two things. They're giving them a very simplistic and overly simplistic explanation of why they're feeling the way they do, and also saying, hey, not only are you being undervalued, right, and shafted by this group, that group, but you should be glorified, right? And it might sound silly to us being like, well, come on, man. Like, the Republicans, they're just selling you a load of BS, right? Just to sell you. They're like used car salesmen. But think about it this way, right? Like I said, I look at everything in like almost like relationships and dating, whatever. But, I'm sure you've all had a partner or a friend who, let's say a girlfriend of yours who might have they keep dating, F-boys, right? Like, toxic dudes, right? And you might tell them like, hey, like, you keep getting your heart broken. You keep chasing this guy. Like, don't listen to these lines that they're giving you, these pitches, oh, you're the greatest woman I've ever met. Like, I'm never met. The love bombing, right? You as a friend can be like, come on, man. Like, come on. You've seen this story before. Like, you can't really believe, you just met a week ago. What do you mean he loves you? He's never felt this way about somebody else before. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not, but like, take it easy. You can identify this and see this, right? But guess what? And even that your friend intellectually might understand, like, yeah, this is a little over the top, but it feels good. It feels good to be told that I'm amazing, that I'm special, I'm unique. Like, we all understand. And then we've all been there before, I'm sure, where we had our friends being like, listen, bro, like, she says this to everybody. You know what I mean? Like, come on, man. How could she think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread? You've known each other for 4 hours. the point is that when you kind of know it intellectually, and the Republicans culturally, politically have been sitting there telling these people who are hurting, and there are actual reasons for them to hurt, but they're simply saying, but here's the problem.
Exactly. So what you're saying is the Republican Party has been very effective at bombing this particular group of people to elevate them, make they feel like they are entitled, that they deserve something more, that they should be, like you said before, glorified. And I think perhaps the Democratic Party has been more like for everybody, and that doesn't feel quite as good if you're, somebody who feels like you were maybe in the past in a position of power, and now because everybody else has been, elevated, you may feel like relegated when actually we're just all trying to lift each other up. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, and I actually think from a messaging standpoint, I think, and again, I think there's a little bit of actual and a little bit of perceived issue with the Democratic messaging, because I think that is effectively what the Democratic Party has been trying to do, like kind of elevate everybody. However, if you you and I were really involved and ingrained in this sort of world, so we kind of know the mindset, the point, the purpose, like the what we're really trying to do here. We have the time and energy to focus on this stuff.
And what are we really trying to do here?
Elevate everybody,
right? Yeah. Have economic affordability for everybody, for sure. Wealth, prosperity, work, wages.
Exactly.
Right.
Like really I think we really ultimately, some of those actual issues we know and identify and are actually trying to provide real world solutions to them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, most people don't have the time or energy. And again, that's a responsibility that us as like the people, I think we've done a terrible job of. I think we as individual voters have failed ourselves and our society and our country at this, right? We form very strong opinions and conclusions about policies, the way the world works, and I'm willing to bet 90% of people out there don't spend more than 5 minutes a year.
Well, and if I may, it's not just I try not to put too. I mean, I think what you're saying is there's personal responsibility and ownership, sure. But at the same time, we have to be aware that we are working more than we have ever worked. You mentioned not having breaks. Some people working 2 or 3 jobs to get by, working long hours, but also when we engage with social media, there are algorithms. We continue to see the same thing on a loop over and over and over again. So it's actually hard to find unbiased information out there because most of us don't watch cable news anymore. And cable news is also, I'll be the first one to say, it has its bias. It doesn't matter whether it's MSNBC, CNN, Newsmax, or Fox. They all have their own bias. Yep. But, given that our phones have microphones, they hear us, they repeat what we want to hear, we get into kind of a feedback loop. Do you think this is also happening with the male population?
100%. I think it happens, of course, with both sides, men, women. I just think it will manifest a little differently, but it absolutely does. And that's kind of one of my, sort of what's maybe down the road, like a practical solution. They're not so maybe as intuitive as one might think, in the sense that what the Republicans are able to capitalize on is the messaging component. They're not offering them any real solutions, right? They're, they're really not. I mean, and that'll become more obvious over time. And I think that's where we're going to have an opportunity as a party to sort of recapture and re-engage. But the messaging has to be right. The messenger has to be right. And, to your previous question about, I think the Dems have a message of trying to lift everybody up. That might be the case. Maybe you and I know that or believe that. But I'll say this. To the average person out there who works a 9 to 5, 9 to 6, and they exhausted and just want to like zonk out at the end of the night or on the weekends, what the message that they're picking up on, and it's not unreasonable or unfair for them to hear this message, or at least it's framed this way, that the Democratic Party is a party for women, right? I don't think that's a bad thing, but like I said, if you really understand that the Republican Party is saying, men, you should be glorified. You guys are awesome.
Well, and there was just a right-wing influencer who came out. This was in the news just recently, talking about the role of women, and it was something that was reposted by our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, which said that that families should vote as a unit. The man is the head of the household, and that women shouldn't even have the right to vote, because why should we vote when you have the male provider, head of household, voting.
Right.
And I mean, there were other things said, but that's part of that message, right?
Exactly. And to us, it sounds like, come on, man, what are we talking about here? We're trying to go to like the medieval times, but it's not that it's an honest message, but it's an effective one to people. Remember, it would be too simplistic to look at guys and say, the problem is, oh, you voted for Trump or you whatever, or in this issue that it's patriarch misogyny. You're just upset that you're losing your power. Yeah, maybe that's a component there. But remember, in our society, everybody, unless you're rich, everybody feels like powerless, right? Everybody does. I think we all feel that. We really, it's a real thing, because at the end of the day, we work so much, and we are so much more productive now as people, as individuals, as workers than we used to be. And we are taking home like substantially less in terms of purchasing power than we used to.
Right.
Like we're getting poorer in many ways, right?
No, they have demonstrated it. The value of the dollar versus like what our labor purchases, right. We absolutely are getting poorer every single day.
For sure. And that, coupled with what you see on social media where, all these people seem to be having an awesome life, it makes people feel like losers. Right? It makes you feel like a loser, especially as a man, like in a different way, I suspect, but it makes you feel like an absolute loser, like a failure.
Well, women feel this the same way. And this is the other thing about social media that has come out, is about how it affects women's viewpoint on how their physical appearance.
Yeah.
But I think it's the same, that what you're saying has a juxtaposition with how men feel about their self-worth, because our self-worth for women and men often are tied to different things, maybe physical appearance versus status and money and influence. Right.
Yeah, and I think while it might be toxic and ineffective long term, there are very practical, easy ways for perhaps women, and I'm not dismissing that. I think you're absolutely right. To because women, if they're, maybe the stereotype is, and there's probably some truth in it, that maybe a lot of their self-worth is based on their physical appearance, whereas a man, their self-worth is often based on what you can provide, right? And
on a surface level.
On a surface level, but I think it's also effective culturally. It is a thing. Might be silly, but it's there, and we have to understand that. The way a woman might be able to sort of like mask that, or at least cope with it, is maybe a little more simplistic, however, and available and accessible than a man having to like generate wealth or power or leadership, right? And it's very, very difficult, and it's maybe harder to satiate, or more difficult to satiate. So, I guess what I'm saying is that it's understandable for a lot of men out there to feel shafted, or like, hey, we don't have a great war here. We're not going to go, our generation isn't going and storming the beaches of Normandy and punching like a Nazi in the face. Like, we don't have anything. It's a pretty hopeless existence. In fact, it's like pretty meaningless in many ways, because we've become so corporatized and it's atomized, and then you see social media, and like everybody but you seems to be doing awesome, which isn't the truth, but it's
cultivated.
Your brain can't tell the difference, right? So there's a real thing there that I just want to say. It's not so, like, if you vote for Trump, you must hate women. It's like, maybe there's some that do, certainly, but remember, even if that is the reason, the Democratic Party needs to do an exponentially better job of, we need to recapture them, or capture them at all. And the messaging, I don't think, has been right, and the messengers have not been right. At the end of the day, even when I look back, and I ran for Congress last year, and I sit here and I'm trying to think, well, what do I remember? What was notable about, Kamala's campaign that they focused on? What was a big cultural issue that they were focusing on? Women's rights, reproductive rights. That's a great thing. But as a man, what does that send to you? What does that say to you? I remember the commercials. I remember the messages out there that are really easy to get hijacked by the Republicans and twisted and turned. Because they're willing to do that. They're nuts. Like, they're so disingenuous, right? They just want to win. They're pathological about it, and we don't seem to be. And so, if I had to sort of sum up, and I close my eyes and I try to remember what the 2024, run up to the election, what some of the main issues was, women's reproductive rights. Great, it's a great thing. Incidentally, it makes it seem like, hey, this party's valuing women.
That's so interesting. I don't disagree with you. And I want to say this also to validate what you're saying, is that when we have a population, no matter what population it is, that feels disempowered, right? Disempowered culturally, socially, economically, any message that will provide some sort of empowerment, is like you said, it's going to feel good. It's going to get a dopamine hit. It's going to, and then it's going to be constantly reinforced through these algorithms. And so you see how addictive that can become. Exactly. But when it comes, and again, I'm very present to this, and this is why I want to continue to have this conversation, is because, you know, I am a woman, and so I don't necessarily understand the perspective of a man, and I think we have to open our eyes and listen to different perspectives and not say that we have the same answer. But I'm interested that there was, you know, with the women's reproductive rights issue, for example, there's a group called Men for Choice that worked really hard on these issues because they understood fundamentally that while they're talking about women's reproductive rights, what that really means for all of us is actually freedom, autonomy, and economic benefit. Because the truth of the matter is that when women do not have that autonomy, when it is impossible to exercise your reproductive freedom, this necessarily impacts men as well. And it also impacts negatively our economy because, you know, unwanted children in this society that, you know, become an economic issue for families. And we've seen across various societies that when women can control their reproductive destinies, individual societies flourish compared to societies where women do not have that control over their reproductive freedom or the timing of their reproduction, such as, you know, countries like Guatemala, some African countries, you know, that keeps that whole society repressed. And I wonder, I agree with you. I don't think that we have been very good at like linking those messages. I think also going back to what you had said about, you know, this disempowered group of people, I believe that Republican messaging, and correct me if you disagree, has been very good at, like we had mentioned before, othering and also dividing and saying our interests are separate and apart and disparate, rather that our interests are actually combined, and through unifying and supporting one another, we can actually create a better society. But I do believe we have not been effective at crafting that message and getting through that you know, that negative feedback loop that we see on social media.
And I gotta say, like, and this isn't like a criticism or anything of the message, because that group, I've met people from that group, and I'm happy they're around. They do great work. They really care. But also, it's important to remember, though, that's a very, 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 people involved in those kinds of groups are already sort of politically minded, politically active, and really thoughtful about some of these specific issues. 99.99% of the country is not, right? Or let's say 90%, right? Something of that sort, if we're being honest, right? You know, even people who think they care, it's really surface level stuff, right? And again, a part of it has to do structurally with how much time and energy we spend, like, working, commuting, and stressing and struggling. We're just looking to check out when we have the time to do it, not like get super engaged in the nuance, right? I'm a nerd when it comes to policy. You might be, but most people are not. And even that, you know, while their message is accurate and great, and those are all things that I love to discuss about how empowering women actually leads to, you know, prosperity for all, right? It's true.
And empowerment for men as well.
Empowerment for men as well. But to understand that, to communicate that requires that person who is not politically minded, not policy oriented, kind of cares about these types of things on a surface level, but we need these people, and that took like a plus B plus C plus D plus, you know, like, and therefore here's why it impacts you. It's like the opposite of an elevator pitch, right?
Right.
It's like, yeah, I agree, but there you've lost them there. When again, remember, what you're up against is them saying, hey, you are awesome. We need to restore your glory. It's cheesy, it's love bomby, but it's effective to those kinds of people because they have an actual right to feel aggrieved about being shafted in society, because they are. They're being shafted like I think everybody else is who's not rich, but they are being shafted nevertheless. And the Democrats, I think, even the trying to message that is so complicated, even if it's true.
Doesn't fit in a soundbite.
No. And also, right, part of the messaging, at least in a mainstream level, and again, I support the messages, but like part of the messaging that I remember was, you know, we need to support women and men. You should be supporting women. We gotta a woman running for president. We got women's rights on the table. Like, good men support women. Like, yeah, that's technically true and all, but remember, you're basically saying, hey, man out there, like, if you want to be good, like, support women. Again, reinforcing this stereotype that this is a party here to look out for women. And if you want to be cool, we'll be cool with you if you support women, which is good and true. However, messaging, and you got the other side who's like, we're telling you how awesome you are. They don't care about you. They care about women, not you.
Right, and it's not empowering to them individually. So what do we?
It's alienating, in fact. That's what I'm saying. It's not just simply we're not empowering them, we're alienating them. And I'm not saying therefore get rid of, women candidates and messaging, but like, it makes it very easy for Republicans who are psychopathic and pathological with trying to win to say, oh, they're trying to like build up women. See, they hate you, bro.
So what do we do? Like, what are some real solutions that we can? I mean, again, often our positions are complicated, intellectual. They don't fit in a sound bite.
Yeah.
How do we re-engage with this population effectively?
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? But I think, as a starting point, I listen personally, and I might get in trouble for saying stuff like this, but it's hard. Because there's this idea about, because what we're talking about, I think, is what is going to be our not just our message, like in a BS kind of a way, but like, what can we do to make sure that we're also messaging correctly, right? And I think at a starting point, it's the message is important, but I personally think the messenger is more important, right? Like, why is Donald Trump so effective, right? In so many ways, right? It's not because he has any sort of, it's not because of the messaging. It's just because of who he is. They'll listen to anything he says, these people, right? He can say, the Republican line for so long has been like free markets, right? Any sort of government intrusion on the free markets is socialism and terrible and, is going to make us all dirt poor. Then he comes along and is like, hey, we're tariffing everybody, which is so antithetical to a free market. It's the polar opposite. It's in fact probably the most egregious non-free market tools we have. And what do? Did they say ho ho ho? Some maybe, yeah, but realistically they're like, yeah, okay, cool. It's like, well,
or reducing the deficit, right, and then increasing the deficit by the largest margin ever in history.
Exactly. Right. Deficits. Oh, let's go juice it up by $3 trillion. Cool. Like, and they don't bat an eye. Why is that? Because we're thinking as Democrats, like, but the message. Whoa, you've been saying this message for decades. Now it's like, yeah, because the message doesn't matter as much. It's the messenger. And I say this to say the reason why I said I might get in trouble for this is because, who are our messengers in this party? They're people who have been here since I was a child, right? A teenager. And it's stale, man. It's not believable. People are not inspired. Obama could inspire people, right? Mm-hmm. He catches your attention. And I think we lack that in this party, to be perfectly honest. Now, this is self-interest and bias of me, of course, but I do think that we need people who can authentically relate to the people we want to capture and catch their attention, their ears, and their votes, right? And I don't think currently we're doing a great job of that, right? I think the messenger is in many ways more important than the message. People will listen to the message if they believe and like the messenger. And I just think, polls out there show that our leadership is like we think Trump has bad polling. Like, our Democratic leadership is more unlikable, right? And that's going to be it's a realization we have to accept. Well,
and the party has a very unfavorable rating, and so for me, being the chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party and also somebody who is interested philosophically in these questions or academically in these questions, I am a policy nerd, but also just in self-help. I'm a huge proponent of self-help.
Right.
You can't fix a problem unless you acknowledge that there is a problem. Right. And when we put our heads in the sand and we pretend that Donald Trump is the problem, that's the problem, and we don't look at ourselves too. Yeah. For again, we can't point the finger. If you point the finger, there's three looking back at you. We have to acknowledge that we have a problem and continue to have these conversations in order to find solutions. Yeah. Because actually, I think, and again, disagree all, and let me know. But I think that really, if we want to empower others, we have to listen to them.
Yeah.
Their voice has to matter. And that's, I think, what we've not been doing.
Correct. Exactly. And that's and the messenger will be able to do that. Mm-hmm. That's the key. Because at the end of the day, sometimes, And when you shame them for voting a certain way, like I know it's cathartic, and sometimes I'd be like, you just want to let loose on these people for voting a certain way and causing the misery on millions of people. But we have to take a step back, take a breath, take a step back, recognizing they're in pain. They're feeling the pain and the suffering, maybe in a different way, but they're feeling something. Let's try to understand that and offer solutions in an authentic way, not like we're patronizing them. That's why the messenger is important. They can tell the difference, even subconsciously, and then offer solutions to their issues, because men do have real issues, right? Maybe we all share some of these issues, but men are affected uniquely by suicide and depression and life expectancy. There are real issues here that we can utilize. Say, hey man, we got a solution for you, and it doesn't have to require 4D chest and mental gymnastics to understand.
It starts with empathy.
Starts with empathy. Just listen to them, man. It goes a long way. Like, you know how it is. Sometimes you just want to be listened to. You just want to vent.
That's absolutely.
You know what I mean? And not feel like they're going to shame you for it or call you a loser or a jerk or a misogynist or whatever. Even if they kind of are deep down, we still need to get them on board. And if we can sort of get them to listen, we can listen to them and relate to them, and maybe even just bring them a little closer to us, then maybe they'll start to buy into some of our other core issues, because as we know as Democrats, we have policies that can really help everybody. Republicans don't. They just fight on the culture front, right? So let's get them closer to us first, not be too extra, and just make them feel like, hey man, you can come talk to us. It's all good.
You're welcome here.
Yeah, you're welcome here, bro.
Yeah.
It's all good.
All right.
I get it.
Well, Joey Mendoza Atkins, thank you so much for being here today. If the listeners want to find out more about you, how can they get in touch?
JoeyForFlorida.com. You can follow me on Instagram, Joey, the number 4FL, or Joey for Florida.
Great.
Yeah, shoot me a message. I'm pretty accessible.
Great. Thank you. Well, y'all have a great day.